Hello, everyone. If you are on EST time, it is about 12 noon. If not, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Jessie. I am with the Assistive Technology Advocacy Center at Disability Rights New Jersey, and I am here today with Doug Katz. Doug is going to talk with us about NULU. That's NULU. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the chance to talk about it with your listeners and viewers. So, should I just jump right in?
Yep, I would say go right ahead.
So, a little bit about me. I'm a disabled vet, so I have my own challenges. My challenges are primarily upper body arthritis, uh, chronic carpal tunnel, and some of the other issues that come with age. But I also have some lower body issues from my time in the military. But the NULU came about, and the NULU comes from actually a very revered and ancient knife called the ulu. And this is what the ulu looks like. This is kind of a small one, but it's an Inuit knife. And before I go into why that was the inspiration, and I'll be doing some of this in the demonstration, this is your traditional knife. And a traditional knife is a great multitasker. I've gone back and forth on how to address a traditional knife like this. I'm gonna try and move this a little bit closer here without having my computer fall. So there you go, special effects. And you can see that the alignment is tip, blade, transition, and handle. That's what everybody thinks of as a knife. But if you think ergonomically and musculoskeletally, it only really aligns this way. Now, this multitasker, this is one of our most ancient tools in general. And you might have had to do this before you did this, because you might have had to hunt and kill an animal or defend yourself before cutting was necessary. So as a multitasker, it's a great tool. But it has some limitations. Anytime that you're trying to cut, and again, you'll see in the demo, now you're trying to transition downward force across the spine of the knife to the tip. I'm sorry, to the blade, which means that you have to grip tighter, which in many ways reduces your strength and your power. Any power that you have from your body is now stuck right here, and it affects your cutting force. You may have to saw it. It brings your shoulder up a lot of times, and sometimes you're even using your other arm to be able to provide downward force in an aligned manner, which for many people, if you have some kind of bilateral issue or you have one arm that may have some problems and the other arm that doesn't, that might not be an option. Now, a chef will tell you, we learn how to do this. And I've talked to chefs about it, and it makes sense. If you look, you're now aligning your muscular skeletal structure with the blade. But this is very hard for many people. I have arthritis. I cannot do this for a long time, and it just requires a lot of skill. And you know, it. I struggle again with some of the concepts with cut because this, when you learn it, is probably pretty good, but it takes years and time and money and things to do, and it's not intuitive. So the ulu, you can see the handle is aligned now with the blade. And what that does is it gives you a better alignment for things like cutting and chopping, and it puts your body more in line with the blade. And the ulu is great. If you know anyone who's ever been to Alaska, they probably come back with an ulu. But the issue is it's a crescent blade, and if you bisect it, you're really getting the same blade just for, two different ways. It doesn't add to utility other than you may not have to sharpen it as much because you can spend different time on the different sides of the blade. But in a sense, you're really only getting 70% of that cutting area for practical use. What we did with the NULU is said, well, and most ULUs are like this. They'll either have a single pin or two connections to the handle. And it limits in a lot of ways that utility that I was talking about. So let me move this over to the other side. This is one of our early 3D printed prototypes. And what we did was we moved the handle, I'm sorry, we moved the connection to the handle to one side. And what that does is it fundamentally improves how it works. So if I'm using, and I'll use the real one for that, if I'm now aligning my body with the blade and I picked a side more or less, it means that as an individual, I can find where on this blade I am most aligned. You can see right now it's, oh, I'll use the other knife for this. You can see I'm aligned here. If I move, then I'm finding different parts of the blade to align with. And by moving the connection here, we brought utility. Here it's just a connection point. On the NULU, it's a blade. So it brings in a chopping capability for when you want to maintain, a straight wrist. The other thing that's very cool is not only do you pick up with what we call the standard grip, 160 degrees of cutting area, when you reverse the knife, you now can't, this part doesn't really add utility in this particular grip, but you now pick up a cleaving motion, and with the tip, you have the ability to do more precise work, all of which I'll show in a minute. Now, the other thing I like is, as I showed you earlier, when you use a knife like this, and I'll use an onion as an example, I have to grip this. If I'm not holding it like a chef, and even if I do, I have to grip it. This, again, does a lot of work. With the NULU, I can hold it just like this. All I'm doing is providing a connection point between my body and the blade. And because of that, I'm not transferring force anywhere from here, except from here to here. And what that does is now it gives me the power, especially in a seated motion, where you lose a lot of leverage. For somebody who's seated, this really becomes a very difficult option, because now you're not only trying to transfer force, you're trying to, without any kind of leverage or moving my body around the blade, there's no way to get leverage, which brings up a good point. If you look, what I'm doing when I'm cutting things is I'm moving where I'm using my body now to align with the blade. So are there any questions before I get into cutting about sort of this is actually, I like bringing this now to my presentations. This is the original prototype. I sometimes get asked the origin story, and I'm a hobbyist knife maker. And I was, right before I had full shoulder reconstruction, I was in my shop, and my head's not cut off. And I had, I couldn't cook because my joints were hurting, and I couldn't make a knife because I couldn't swing a hammer. But sitting in my shop was a circular saw blade. And this was literally, this is made of a old circular saw blade from a circular saw. So I got to work on my grinder, and I started working with some different variations to see how I could maximize it. So I always like to use that as, sometimes I can inspire people to say, hey, you know what, sometimes you can make something out of anything and it turns into something. So how does the NULU generally work? So I'm going to start with a harder vegetable. You know what, I'm going to start with a potato, because that's a really good place to start, like a root vegetable. And I get asked sometimes, oh, one quick safety note. I do recommend a cutting glove for the hand that is not using the knife at the very least. So we do have these, people can buy them from us, but they're generally available. It's just a mesh cutting glove. And while I don't have the limitations that many people deal with, you can get distracted, you can get, there's a lot of ways that you can end up cutting yourself, regardless of the knife. A knife like this, as an example, you can still cut yourself. So I always recommend a cutting glove. It adds a layer of safety, regardless of whether you have a disability or a challenge, you're tired, you're whatever. it creates a lot more safety. So before I move on, are there any questions?
Yeah, I actually was going to ask you specifically about um walking us through while you're doing the demo. Can you walk us through the safest way to
Absolutely.
to
And one thing
utilize the knife?
is it's there are safety fundamentals, right? There's things that you can do always to create the safest environment for anything, whether it's, shooting a gun, riding your bike, cutting something. And I think the fundamentals are always a sharp knife, paying attention to what you're doing, and using a glove. The thing we struggle with the NULU is people say, "How do I use it?" And my answer is always how it works for you, which is hard for people to grasp because for so long they've been told there's the right way to use a knife. That in some circumstances creates a less safe environment because you're trying to work around a design that may not necessarily be the best. When you're using the NULU, because it adapts to you more or less, you then have more of an ability to use it in a lot of different ways. And there is no right or wrong way, I guess. So, keeping those fundamentals. Now, one of the other things, and this is where the vision impaired piece really comes in, is it's also knowing where your blade is. And if you're cutting with a traditional knife, let's say you're chopping, there's just micro movements going on. And there are aspects of that where you can create an unsafe environment where you can catch your finger. If you see the NULU is completely aligned with the body, you know where that blade is. So I guess a good way to answer your question, I've never thought about it till now, is the safest way to use a knife is know where the sharp part is and know where the part is that can hurt you. And with a traditional knife like this, it's you can kind of tell where it is, but those small movements could mean your fingertip. With the NULU, you know where that blade is because it's always fully aligned with that V that your thumb and forefinger make. So if you're able to kind of grasp it like this, even this lightly, you have that ability to know where the blade is. And I remember when we launched this, the actual product in June of last year, we first did it at an Abilities Expo in Schaumburg, just sort of north of Chicago. And there was a gentleman who was in a wheelchair. It looked like he had been in some type of accident involving fire. So he really had only 2 digits on his hand. And he picked up the knife and used it like a champ because he was, one, able to transfer that force, but two, he knew where that blade was. So it really just comes down to knowing where to keep your finger away from. I talked about this being a table saw with a table saw or a table saw blade, but it's a good example because with a table saw, you know where that blade is. You can work around it to make sure that you're safe. When this can move with your wrist, which is a very pliable joint, it creates that challenge. So, are there any other questions before I get into demonstrating?
I was gonna ask, the blade is very obvious on the rounded area, the semicircle area. Is there also a blade on the straight side?
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a blade on the heel. We call that the heel blade, and I'll demonstrate that. And what's nice is sometimes for slicing, this works really well for people, but for chopping, it can be an issue. This, you require no articulation of the wrist. And actually, I even like using this edge for, like, if I want to open the peel on a grapefruit or something, this little edge becomes some nice utility with respect to being able to I have a grapefruit, maybe I'll grab it in a minute. But being able to sort of get through some of the leathery parts of a particular fruit or vegetable, and then being able to kind of switch to a regular cutting place. So that's where it comes into that 160, 162 degrees of cutting area, where with this, it's really kind of a one-shot deal. You're not using necessarily the whole blade without a lot of effort. With this, you've got half of a crescent. With this, you can use the entirety of the blade. So with a traditional knife, and again, I'm going to use a root vegetable, and I'm going to actually bring this a little closer and move this. Is that a pretty good view for everybody? Fantastic. So, let me try one other thing just so it's a little bit better. I apologize. Is that better? Or is it worse?
Um, it was a little better before.
Okay.
I would angle it down a little bit. There we
Okay.
go.
Okay, perfect. And that way I can grab a grapefruit to show that. Hold on. Sorry, I'm kind of all over the place.
No,
Okay.
you're fine. It's all
So
about adapting, right?
it's all about adapting. So if I'm cutting a potato, right now, if you look at my hand, look at the grip that's required. And I love using a root vegetable first. I'm going to flip this over. This is one of our old cutting boards. Oh, another safety thing I would recommend. This is one of our old cutting boards from our Kickstarter, and I use it just because it's kind of my old faithful. But I recommend, and our new cutting board does have rubber feet so that it doesn't move. And that's another good thing. If you can take any movement out of the equation, that helps. But for me, I don't have a problem. This one doesn't really move on me. But so if I'm cutting a potato, all of a sudden I have to put downward pressure. You can see how it's affecting my biomechanics, where now my shoulder has to come up. Let me move this up a little bit for that. So you can see the potato's still down there. Now you can see I'm out of alignment. What I'm trying to do is line this up with the blade more or less to be able to get some force. Or if I decide to do it here, again, it requires a lot of elbow, a lot of wrist, a lot of hand, all of that. When I'm using the NULU, I can attack a potato a couple of different ways. And I usually use it like this because that way it reinforces for me to not grip it. Because anytime there's a term called the kinetic chain, and the kinetic chain is this. This is where everybody's strength is in your core. If you grip something like this, all of a sudden the entirety of your body is focused right there. I'm a martial artist, and some of that comes from that world. But so if I'm using the NULU, and again I can use it however is comfortable. Now I'm directly transferring force from my body to the potato. If I want to slice with a regular knife, I have to, it's a movement, and it's not necessarily aligned the same way. If I want to slice with this, it's almost like a machine. And my body, you can see the way I'm using it. I prefer to use kind of the main part. My body is aligned with that part of the blade. Now, I talked about seated people, seated cutters. This is where this reverse blade comes in. And when I was talking about the Abilities Expo, I'm going to come down here. When I was talking about the Abilities Expo, we went to it just thinking about upper body, because that was me, and I'm the only one who's disabled on our team. We sold more to people who were seated, because you can see if I'm trying to do this, it's pretty hard, right? Like I can do it, but now this has to come up. And what I'm trying to do then is get my shoulder into it. I can't use my core at all, and I'm cutting this way. And what it means is that a lot of people don't cut if they have to be seated. What we saw people do, and what I probably would do with a potato, is cut through that way, which is simple. But then we had people there, you can go back like this in a cutting motion where you can see now I'm, in a sense, rocking my body and engaging my core to be able to cut, which for a seated user, I hate the term game changer, but really becomes a game changer because now there's a fluidity to their movement that allows for engagement of the core. So really, my hand isn't doing anything. My arm isn't really doing anything. The knife is connected to my core as I'm seated back, and there's about nothing that I can't cut that way. Now, we talked also about using this heel blade, and for a seated cutter now, it also gives the capability to be able to cut this way in what's typically called a hammer motion. And one thing that comes out when we do demos like this is, yes, there are knives. There are knives that you see out there that's like a chef's knife with a vertical handle, but it's limited in utility. And one of the things that I do that drives one of my partners crazy when he's filming is I will be very organic, right? So I may cut this way and then start chopping this way. I'm not swapping out knives. I'm continuing to use this knife in the same grip. I'm just altering either my body just a little bit or how I'm articulating my wrist in a way that's allowing me to use as much of the blade as possible, which gives me really good control. One good way to think of it, and I should have talked about this earlier, is when I talk about angles, angles are really based on a circle. And I'm going to move it this way for a minute. So when you think of a circle, you think of a center point and radii. So to understand what I'm doing here, it's thinking about my hand becoming the center of a circle and being able to use all the radii along this blade to be able to do what I want. So I talked also about the chop or the cleaving motion. So now you can see this way, my hand is aligned kind of with this part of the blade. So if I want to cleave, I can cleave, and it's really, you're not a typical cleaver, and I don't have one. You know, if you thought of this as a cleaver, sort of as a moment arm, you're bringing a lot of force, and what you're trying to do is build an arc where that cleaver is going to hit there. This is more of a punch where I'm able to cleave in a way that really brings a lot of strength to this. But again, I know right where, because I can even do it. I have another potato here. I do have a potato. Oh, I'm losing my celery. Dropped carrot. I can even do it with you when you saw it as gripping it this way. And you know, a story I like to tell. I had a different version of the prototype when a couple Thanksgivings ago, and I wanted to see if the cleaving motion would be able to get through the turkey, to take a leg off. And a lot of my issues are fine motor skill issues, so I still have a good amount of being able to put my. I went through the turkey, and at that point, I still had one plastic cutting board, and it went through the cutting board
Oh,
without
wow.
a lot of force.
Wow.
So I think what it comes down to is, in many ways, it's a very efficient way to use force. I'm going to grab a bowl here so I can move the stuff from cutting. It provides a great way to transfer that force in the right way. So I'm going to move away from the potato. And are there any questions out there right now as I'm moving to the next
I
item?
just wanted to circle back to what you said before about using the the knife as a mechanism that can be used in a few different ways. So, um, it really does come down to what it sounds like is it comes down to how the person feels in the moment that they're going to be able to move the knife with whatever it
Yes.
is they're cutting.
Yes, thank you for that question. And um, it's an interesting component because even if you have a disability, it's not static. You have good days, you have bad days. One of the other issues I have are really, really bad migraine headaches caused by some bad surgery that the military did. It wasn't their fault though. But some days the headaches are worse than others. I'm like everyone else. My arthritis might be worse on a humid day than a non-humid day. So it does change with how you feel, and it gives you an ability for any particular day to adjust the way that you're using it in a way that would most benefit your particular needs. Any other questions before I move on?
Everyone else has their mic off, so I'm gonna assume that they're good. But if you guys want to, you can turn on and
Yeah,
say hi.
absolutely. I love it to be interactive, or if someone wants to see me demonstrate something. One side note that I do want to mention as I'm going through all this, if for some reason you don't want to ask a question, or you have some specific questions relative to your own needs that you feel might be inappropriate or you don't want to share, we are betaing an AI tool that more customizes the interaction before buying and even after buying. Things like dropping a recipe into it and getting the guidance on how best to use this for you. Um, just how to cut particular items, right? I'm going to move on to a carrot actually right now, and a carrot is even harder than a potato. So again, with a carrot, it depends on how you're doing it. But if you're cutting, oh, I should. Oh, okay, you can. Is that a good angle?
Yeah, we're good. We can see.
Right. So if you're cutting it, the other thing is control, right? Like I'm now trying to cut with some degree of accuracy to cut whatever size that I want. And if I'm using, depending on where I'm using, but if I'm using the tip of the knife or I'm using this, it's I don't necessarily see what's going on with that. The other thing we talked about is knowing where that blade is, right? You can see that alignment. I can work really, really quickly and safely uh, using this. And again, you can see, I keep covering up the blade. It's that direct force transfer. Now, sometimes, let's say you're doing something like stir fry, where you want to cut it more in like a julienne. So, my dog's like carrots. Look at that one. So you might cut it this way first, which is hard in the first place, and then you might cut it again this way so that you can julienne. That already put a lot of stress on my hand. Now to julienne, you're going to work this way, or you might, you're going to have to find what works with this for you if you have issues. The one thing I like about this, the NULU, is one, let's say I'm cutting it, I can use that slicing motion to get through there. And then this is where I use this tip. Now I have the ability to go straight through and cut things. This one's tough. I think I had a knot. There you go. And again, you're cutting really, really thin pieces of whatever you're cutting, and then you're able to really gain a lot of control over using that. Now, I want to
That's
talk about
just like a night and day difference of how easy you could see it
it.
on
Really
camera.
is. There's a learning curve for people. But so you just saw me just now, like if let's say now I'll take this part of the carrot. And now if you are a seated cutter, you are able to work back and you're able to make those cuts in a way that work for you. But again, this is why I like to use a cutting glove, because it's a little bit of a different motion for people. And one thing we do see is when someone uses it and gets or regains the ability to cut, sometimes there's an overzealousness where you might move too fast. So again, cutting glove is a good way to go. Now, even if you're a seated user, because you're pushing now, you're not trying to use a knife that is perpendicular to the cutting surface. You're able to even use the I don't know, you could call it the precision part of the blade to be able to make those cuts and use it in a way that is efficient where you're able to really control that. So that's julienne type cutting. I got to figure out what I'm going to make with all this stuff when we're done. So I mentioned, fruit with, let's say, a leathery outside. This is where, again, what I like to do is use this corner part to be able to cut through that. You can see where it really, really efficiently cut through that. Now, this is a bigger item. So this sometimes isn't the easiest way to cut it because there's going to be a point where you see my fingers are going to be where the grapefruit is. So what you would typically do is you can see when I'm using this blade now, there's less of a clearance issue. So now I'm able to cut through it. It took a little bit of work. We are working on another knife that we're hoping to release sometime in 2026. That will be a little more extended one. But until then, this knife can still actually do that. Again, I have an eggplant. No eggplant jokes, please. And you can see, again, this would be problematic for me. But if I use it this way, now, and the eggplant's kind of leathery, again, I could kind of keep it that light touch. I'm able to still cut through that. If I'm using this, it's pretty hard to cut through. Right now, because these have a pretty leathery outside, I am really having to work. I'm going to have to saw my way through that. And what I hear from some people that legit is, well, a sharp knife solves that problem. And I would say a sharp knife solves the dull knife problem of any blade. It doesn't make a blade that is ill designed to be able to do the task that you're looking at doing. It might make it a little bit easier, but it's not going to solve the dynamics of this. And these are probably, and this one's just a cheap chef's knife that I use because more people probably have this in their kitchen than like $1,000 carbon steel. This is generally what people are going to have. This we make out of a high quality stainless. I'm not sure which one. It's a variation of a pretty common one, but this is sharp as well. These things both sharpened or honed to the same edge. This is still going to beat it. If this is dull and this is sharp, I still would have my money on this. Now, one other safety thing is I do believe that having a sharp knife is a component of safety. And I get the question often about how to sharpen this. What I recommend is a typical pull-through sharpener. It's what many people have in their kitchen anyhow, or they should. It's a great design. I can't say anything bad about it. But what it does is it allows you to be able to sharpen the entirety of the knife, to be able to pull it through this way, and then there's a honing side. This is one that we also sell because we found it to be the best. And then you're able to hit both those edges. And then, I use this for this knife too. So really, it's a matter of doing the same thing. But then, I ran it through 2 times both sides. If I'm doing a grapefruit, this is still pretty hard. Like the knife is sharp, you can see that I'm getting through the skin, but there's a lot of movement on my part. I did this knife the same amount of times, and this one's squishing on me. So, let me, you guys get the point. So are there any questions before I move on to some other cutting techniques?
I think we're good on the questions. Will you also show us before the end how to best um veil and unveil, sheath or unsheath the
I will. I left my sheath downstairs. So that was my fault. I apologize because I had it in the stand. Wait, I might have it in here. Otherwise, I can take a TV timeout if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean that's totally fine. I know a lot of people are curious, especially for one-handed users in the kitchen who are trying to,
No,
melt.
it's a great point, and it was an oversight on my part. Give me 2 seconds.
Okay, sure.
Uh, I'm so glad you asked that question. So, one of the things, oh, there we go. One of the things that we found, we had an original, this is the new sheath, and it is a clamshell that you can open this way. And our intent was to have it for one-handed opening with the clamshell, but that's not as easy as it sounds. And the living hinges can sometimes be a challenge. So we redesigned it so that it fits in for one-handed extraction. I'm wearing a glove, so, but that's what these little protrusions are for. And it's, you gotta line it up, but it will fit right back in. So if you're one-handed and you need to pull it out, you can, if you can get a purchase on it that way, you're able to sheath it and unsheath it that way. So, and again, you can always use the clamshell, but it's a little bit harder. We did want good retention across the entirety of the blade. So that's the new sheath. And again, it's nice. It's good for that one-handed use. Any questions?
No, I think that covers it.
Awesome. So again, I can go through a couple more, with something like peppers. I like these little ones. Again, it really comes down to um, whichever part works best for you. Again, for me, with this kind of thing, it's an ability to just move through it pretty quick. And you see, this is effortless for me. And then, if seated, you can really do the same thing. Oh, I'm gonna flip to something else real quick here. One of the things that I guess you can consider a safety component is our cutting board comes with a bowl because stuff tends to go all over the place. So with this bowl, things tend to stay a little bit more set. Now, one thing is you can see for me doing in the reverse, I like to put that angle a little bit tighter for something like this so that where with a bigger item, I'm bringing it this way, but with a smaller item, I might keep this a little bit closer to the ground, or sorry, the cutting surface. It's kind of whatever works. So it's hard in the demonstration to be able to show everything because we actually find out new and different things every day about how people are using it, what works for them, and all that kind of stuff.
So, is there a space where people have left um comments on how they have decided to use the NULU for themselves?
There are reviews on our regular website, nuluknives.com, and there are reviews on our Amazon page as well. So they can go there and see the reviews. Actually, the best review or the most impactful, I guess, was a week or two ago. And there was a gentleman who I was introduced to through a friend of mine from West Point, who's an orthopedic surgeon. And he had given the knife to one of his patients who had been a food prep person, a meat cutter, his entire career, decades. I think it was 30 or 40 years. And his comment to us was, I can actually cook again. So we're going to get that review up there, but there are some good reviews. One of the interesting reviews, and because I've kind of gone through the demo, everybody kind of sees it.
Right.
We very interesting review early on Amazon. And on Amazon, there's something called Vine. And Vine is where people get free product and they review it. And there was a particular review that was one that's breaking down our overall reviews on Amazon. But it wasn't a review of the knife as much as a connection to this and not wanting to get rid of the paradigm that every knife should look like this. And I actually wrote an article about it in response because it spoke to some of the challenges of changing people's understanding of what cutting is. That person loved this kind of knife. They were very connected with its history. My thinking is if you design something, if you were to design a cutting implement that would be integrated into a machine, it wouldn't look like this unless it was a stabbing machine because you're trying to maximize the efficiency, how much energy it draws, all those kind of things. And that's kind of what our response was to that particular review is I get it. Like you love your knife, then
Then
you're
you're good. Don't,
yeah,
use your
well,
knife.
or it's even getting an understanding of why you like it, right? Like is it and it ends up it was somebody who had gone to culinary school and gone through all of the machinations that I was talking about to get trained. And as a result, anything that minimizes that investment of time and money and dedication and all that becomes a threat. And that's been one of our challenges. It's one of the things that we run into as a side note is we're on Amazon. There is no adaptive category on Amazon. There is no adaptive marketplace. There's a couple of distributors out there, but there is no purely adaptive marketplace that reviews things in a way that the people who need it understand it. There's no proclivity to for regular organizations that review products to review also is there an adaptive component that if somebody bought this it at least solves some of those problems. So it really opened our eyes to a resistance, a headwind. And in some ways it's the same headwind that we run into in what we're doing because we're working on an adaptive cutting board and all that. People don't like to accept a reduced capability of doing anything, whether you call it disability or whatever. But
I just kind of find it a little humorous that you got that kind of review because you just showed us um, multiple ways to use one tool, whereas
right,
the other tool can only be used the one way. I mean, you know, um,
right.
unless you're smacking it down
Well, or
when you're working with like garlic or something.
right, or unless you, yeah, or unless you're using it this way, and this alone is going to be a limiter for a lot of people. So the ability to use this, it was funny. The chef that pointed this out to me. I've not been to culinary school, but he was showing me. I said, "What's the handle for?" Then, and he said, "Balance." And my answer to that is if you're using the handle as a counterweight to the blade and having to contort your body to engage this tool, it's not the right tool for that. Again, when I go hiking or when I'm, doing things around the house, if I have like an everyday carry type knife, it doesn't look like the NULU, right? The NULU is really designed for the kitchen. I'm playing around with it a little bit and like opening boxes and things, and it's great for that. But if I'm going hiking, I like having the pointy part. I
Right.
like a knife that I can put into a branch and hit with another branch, and then it creates a wedge where I can make firewood. That's an appropriate linear set. You know, I do martial arts and we do some sword work. A katana and this are just in a different type of world, but it's about optimization and it's about letting go of certain paradigms to move to optimization. And I think what we hear from, like that one review, what we hear from the community of the people that it most helps is that it's a life-changing introduction into what they have in their kitchen. Because many, the same Abilities Expo, I remember I called my partners afterward and I said, you guys have to do this with me next time because it validates everything we're doing and puts the challenges and the grind of being a startup in context. There was one family that I'm not sure what condition the person had, but they were in a wheelchair and there were some upper extremity issues. And they bought the knife. And as they all left my demo space, they were joking about now you have to help in the kitchen. Now I have 3 able-bodied kids. 2 of them like to cook. One likes to cook with me. One doesn't cook at all. All of them take for granted the ability to own your diet, your nutrition, having a contribution in a family meal. You can kind of see my kitchen is like this open kitchen. And on a holiday, you know, we have Thanksgiving over and everybody's involved. And to not be involved is a travesty. Whether it's a grandparent who was a key part of that who no longer can use a knife. I was a caretaker of my father for a good amount of time, a couple, 3, 4 years. And he was in his late 80s. He was helping me with the prototypes and it reinvigorated him being involved in the kitchen. And if it can bring that, that's an amazing thing. And so that's kind of what we're hoping to do with this space is not only bring cutting and the cutting board that we're going to be rolling out, but hopefully incent other companies, other inventors, other folks like me who, you know, I was an entrepreneur to some degree, but this became my passion and I hope more people pick up on it because the number, when you layer disabilities and you introduce into disabilities age as a disability, because age is the chronic condition. You can age perfectly fine and never have any issue, but your strength, dexterity, coordination, all of those, eyesight, right? Like I would consider myself somewhat vision impaired if I'm not wearing my readers, right? I just don't have the visual acuity to be able to read things anymore. So, you know, if I get a new prescription, it's always an adventure if I can't find my reading glasses because I'm not able to do it. Am I disabled? For that task, I am. So I'm really hoping that more people bring this stuff to folks like you because your lending library should be busting at the seams and there should be people calling you because there are the options there. And unfortunately, there aren't right now.
Yeah, definitely, definitely agree there with everything that you've said, and we just want to thank you for your time today,
Oh, thank
especially
you for the opportunity.
on the demo component of this, which is really, really useful. So, we're gonna say adios
Can
for now, and
I,
I
can
will,
I just real quick?
yep,
Just really quick things. If there's any questions on using it, again, I mentioned the NULU Navigator beta, and I'll send you the link. And there's also a ton of video on our website and explanatory stuff on how to use it. Also, if anyone does a search of me, I have my own social channels where I do a lot of demos. And if anybody wants to see a demo, as you know, you guys create content. Content is sometimes hard to create to the audience. Reach out to me. Ask me how to cut something because I would love to be able to bring that in.
that would be
Also,
great.
right now, and this is purely self-promotion, my company and I are competing for the Entrepreneur of Impact. Winning that for my company would mean $25,000 in capital, a spread in Entrepreneur Magazine, but it allows us to level up. It would allow us to bring our cutting board to the market sooner. I'll provide the link if anybody would love to vote. To be able, it's a voting type thing. You all decide who moves on, and I would be very, very grateful if anybody could help us get through the different phases of it. On my Facebook page, my LinkedIn and everything is a link as well. And I just hope people can support us in our thing. In a way, you're supporting what everybody out there needs in terms of adaptive products by supporting us. So I'd love your support.
The cooking board is also adaptive, yes?
Well, what we're doing
Sorry,
with
the
it,
cutting
we have
board.
a cutting board right now that has a bowl in it. It's great for use with it. The cutting board that we are going to be releasing, again, depending on if we can get the capital the same way, it'll be an add-on to that with articulated arms that hold food in place. So it's very, very cool. We're in the late prototype stage right now. And that's the kind of thing that support will get us, because it's hard starting up a business. So thanks.
Great. All right, I'm gonna stop the recording now and then I won't end the meeting just yet because I have one other question for you, so
Thank you. And again, thank you for the ability to talk to the people who you serve.
awesome. All right, here we go. We'll